We're here to make a new type of news.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Making news just for you. It's February 29th here in Seoul. I'm Shin, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy last day of February, everyone.
Happy Thursday, and Park Gi-hoon.
Good morning.
Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Our first story, the widow of billionaire investor David Gottesman has donated $1 billion to cover tuition for students at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Ruth Gottesman, who used to work as a professor at the college, inherited her husband's money when he died in September of 2022. At the time, she told the New York Times that her husband left her a whole portfolio of Berkshire Hathaway stock instructions. When he was alive, he shared a close friendship with the founder of Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett. Gottesman's donation will help all fourth-year students at the university be reimbursed for their spring 2024 semester tuition. Also from August, all students will receive free tuition. South Korean baseball player Lee Jung-hoo made his San Francisco Giants debut on Tuesday. He singled in his first round at the bat in part of a 5-run inning in the Giants' 10-10 tie with Seattle. His performance proved that Lee came up to par with his lucrative salary, which some said was an overpayment. Lee signed a 6-year, $113 million deal this winter and is seen as both the starting center fielder and leadoff hitter. Back in 2022, Lee was the MVP in Korea's baseball league, but he missed almost all the final 2 months of the last season after going through surgery to repair a fractured ankle. And over in the U.S., the state of Florida has passed legislation banning anyone under the age of 16 from social media platforms. For a while, those supporting this move said it would better protect young people from online risks to their mental health. This measure is going to the desk of the Governor Ron DeSantis on Thursday. If signed into law, it would require social media platforms to terminate the accounts of teens and use a third-party verification system to screen out those who are underage. Now, Florida's governor last month raised concerns over this bill, though, citing how it infringes on privacy rights. He said while he agrees that social media could be harmful for children, it should really be up to the parents to supervise them, especially over their social media habits at home. This always seems to be the debate when we talk about healthy social media habits and how to facilitate them. Those who believe the government needs to amend and strengthen legislation point to the plethora of harmful content that causes young users to fall victim to anxiety, depression, or mental illnesses. Critics, though, point to how this goes against one's freedom of expression or speech, which is exactly why I would like to ask what our panelists think about this debate. Where do you stand on this issue?
I remember we talked about this issue before on one of our episodes, and I said it's really up to the children's parents to take more responsibility over how much exposure they should be allowing their children on social media. Look, I think it's great to see that Florida State is heading in the right direction, and to even see Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg actually sincerely apologize to the parents of the exploited children at a Senate hearing. Personally, I try to refrain from using too much social media because I too know I've actually experienced how addictive and harmful it can be to not only your mental health but also your physical health, because you're always in front of the screen. And even adults, not just children, have a hard time staying away from their phones, especially on social media. So I think it's not just the children who are affected, but also us as well. And lastly, I think stronger restrictions should be imposed on how much freedom there is on social media platforms and how much we should be able to see and show on these platforms at the same time.
Exactly. So based on your experience, you would find a need for regulations in place because children are much more susceptible than adults. But what about you, Cheska? Where do you stand on this issue?
I know there's currently a lot of debate going on and whether this will be actually a law that is instituted in the United States. But one of the things that I think about is that we have laws for driving, we have age restrictions for drinking, and now social media has gotten to the point where there is so much rampant activities that are happening that are completely unrestricted. So in a way, holding an age limitation in social media activity, I think, could be a positive way. And of course, just like with drinking and driving, parents should take part in guiding their children in terms of healthy usage of social media. And as Kyun mentioned, adults have trouble even regulating themselves when it comes to addiction with social media. But also on top of that, I do hope as we move forward, because now we're entering the metaverse and the AI technology, where they're using like fake faces and
Exactly.
contents are coming in that are completely out of our hands. There should be law instituted against these measures too, so that we have a more safe ground for social media environment as well.
And I think you both made very commendable arguments here, but at the same time, I do want to play devil's advocate because you're going to be banning all teens who once had access to these social media. And you guys all know if you have something and then you lose it, you know that feeling and you want to go back to it again.
Yeah.
So I do think that this should be considered before any final legislation is passed through. Now, heading into our main discussion topic of the day, today's not only the last day of February, but it's also the day before we celebrate the March 1st movement here in Korea. 105 years ago on this day, thousands of Koreans came out to the streets demanding independence from colonial Japan. Now, here in the studio, Cheska, why don't you tell us a little bit more about the March 1st movement?
It is a remarkably significant day in Korea's history, as it is this country's Independence Movement Day. And this year, as Yeon mentioned, marks its 105th year anniversary. So in 1919, on March 1st, according to history, was one of the largest independence movements in Korea against Japanese colonization. Now, historical records vary, but between about 1 million to about 2 million people all over Korea were involved in this movement at the time. It was a non-violent, civil disobedient protest and was met with, of course, violent forces from the Japanese police at the time. And also importantly, this was one of the very first large-scale independence movement that happened in a colonized country after the First World War.
Right, and before Kyun continues, just to give you guys a little grasp of history, Japan colonized Korea from 1910 to 1945. So just 9 years since the country was colonized, thousands came out to the streets seeking independence. Now, Kyun, would you add a little more on the history about this event?
Sure. So March 1st movement in Korea sent big waves across the world at that time. This movement positively influenced other weak small nations, just like Korea, to join the anti-imperialist movement, which led to the liberation of many countries, including Korea in 1945. So without this significant historical event, South Korea would not have been able to declare independence, which we celebrate on August 15th every year. Even though Korea is still divided into two nations in armistice right now, we need to keep in mind this independence movement because it helped a small nation like us to open its doors to a country of so much peace and prosperity that we're experiencing right now. So I think tomorrow marks a very significant, important day for all of us as Koreans.
And as a person who's really interested in this historical era, I remember a lot of historians calling it a beacon of South Korea's first gesture of democracy because it was quite peaceful. Thousands just came out, regular people. And at the time, a majority of people that actually came out to the streets were young people in their 20s or 30s, actually students, right?
Yes, absolutely. As you mentioned, one of the things that really moves me about this particular movement also is that when I think about March 1st, Hamilchol, is that the leaders of this movement were all extremely young. We're talking about university, college students in the early 20s, some even probably our age right here at the News Generation studio. So on the day of, thousands of young people gathered in Tapgol Park while one of the independence leaders read out the Proclamation of Independence, and people started chanting, "Long live free Korea." Now, one of the quotes from the original proclamation that were written almost 100 years ago that really touched me was this. They had 3 pledges under the proclamation, and it said, quote, "We act in spirit of liberty, never in enmity. And to the last person and to the last moment, respect order in all our actions and ensure that our demeanor and claims are always honorable and upright." Now, I cannot possibly believe that in the time of fight for freedom against years and years of persecution, violence, they were still saying we do not act in enmity and we uphold honor and respect. I mean, to me, that is just, that sends me chills.
Exactly. And to think that they were all our age, in their 20s and 30s, even younger.
Yeah.
We saw young students come out to the streets. Would you like to add on?
Right. So 3.1절 was only possible thanks to the February 8th Declaration of Independence in 1919. This was a proclamation made by the Korean Young People Independence Organization, consisting of around 600 young students who actually lived in Japan at that time. So in the document, it declares that Korea is an independent state, not a colony of the Empire of Japan. So this event spread quickly back to Korea, and in just 3 weeks, invigorated the independence movement that is also known as 삼일절. So this part of Korean history might not be so relatable to millennials and especially Gen Zs. However, it's definitely something that we should all be proud of and thankful, as Korea wouldn't be Korea now without those young groups of people.
Exactly. And speaking of many young people stepping up, risking their lives for the better of the country, I mean, I don't think they would have known that this would be the end result, seeking independence, because at the time we were being oppressed. We were seeing a lot of penalties for those who go against the imperial Japanese authorities at the time, yet they took the courage. So now I would like to shed light onto the actual independence fighters who were quite young and really helped Korea pave the way for independence.
One of the person that I would like to introduce today, he is Yoon Dong-ju. He is a poet and an activist, and he is one of the definitions, I would say, and representation of non-violent activist in that he wrote a number of poems about freedom and independence. He published a poem called Seoshi, called The Heavens, the Wind, and the Stars and the Poetry. And he continued to write about his desire for the country's freedom and also his tortured heart that he couldn't do more for the country. Now, one of his poems, Seoshi, reads, "Let me have no shame under the heaven till I die." He was arrested by Japanese police and unfortunately died as young as 28 in the prison. Now, he's still remembered and revered as Korea's national literary figure, and Yoon Dong-ju left a lasting contribution to Korea's history through his poems that perhaps I do believe were confessions of his poor heart.
And you can see that Yoon Dong-ju used his literary talent to actually contribute to the independence movement. Were there any other independence activists that really contributed to our future now?
Yes, another historical figure in Korea is YUGwansun. She's one of the most famous Korean independence activists and a symbol for the movement. She played a big role in the nationwide protests where people chanted, "Long live Korean independence." She was imprisoned, but continued her fight for Korean independence. She died at a young age of only 18 after being tortured and beaten up by the Japanese military. She wrote while in prison, "Even if my fingernails are torn out, my nose and ears ripped apart, my legs and arms crushed, this physical pain does not compare to the pain of losing my nation. My only remorse is not being able to do more than dedicating my life to my country." So just by seeing what she did, even in prison, fighting until her death for the independence of our country, I feel very proud at the moment. And really, these figures, not just these two, but there are many more that we should be remembering right now.
Exactly. These two, though they're representative, there were so many thousands of other young independence fighters. And if you really think about it, they were just our age. They had a bright future ahead of them, even though they were living in quite depressing historical times. And though this is just limited to Korea, I'm well aware that so many other countries have history like us, whether they had an oppressive colonial power, colonizing or imperializing their nation, or fighting for independence. That is why we asked our viewers if they have any notable youth heroes or independence activists in their country. So take a look at the screen to find out what 3 of our global viewers had to share with us. Let's start with Tim. Tim said in Singapore, there's Lim Bo-sung, who was a fighter against the Japanese. In Australia, there's Ned Kelly, who's Australia's greatest rebel hero. Groovy King said, talk about Chhatrapati Sambhaji and Shivaji. They were historical warriors and kings of Maratha Empire who wanted to free India from its foreign invasions when the foreign invaders started persecuting the native culture and people. Benny said, a historical figure from the Philippines is Emilio Aguinaldo, the Philippines' first ever president, and he led our country's independence against the Spanish and later American colonizers. And the reasons why we're introducing the March 1st movement on today's episode on NewsGen is to look back at history and really reflect on how our ancestors paved the way for a better future for us. And I think our generation really should be aware that history is important because we don't want to repeat past mistakes, but also use it as a great barometer or maybe like a mirror as to find out what we should better do for its future. But how exactly are we interested in history? Do you think we are?
Unfortunately, and perhaps due to the 150th year anniversary and at the time being so long, many young people do not actively, I think, commemorate March 1st, let alone know what the day actually stands for, other than it is a red holiday on a calendar. While I do completely understand that it seems so distant at a time where everything happens in a borderless web, where freedom is so freely given, it is important to at least understand the magnitude of what we have been given by the sacrifices of those who came before us. As we mentioned with Ki-woon on the last last episode, history is a true reflection of who we are, to where we're headed. So I do hope that we make an effort to really remember that.
What about you? What do you think? Do you think our generation is well aware about the importance of history?
To be honest, not really, because I do agree with what Cheska mentioned. You know, not many people are really interested in history and aware of these important events unless we're really educated and told by our parents from a young age. Now, I too lived abroad from a young age, so I didn't really grow up learning about Korean history, but one way that I did actually find out was through Korean films that were actually made to reiterate these past important events, historical events.
Yeah.
And so I actually learned quite a lot through watching these films. And so for those who are not so much interested in Korean history or learning about history through books or through their parents, maybe this could be one entertaining way to actually learn about the past.
Exactly, and it's no doubt that it's important to learn history because we don't want our past mistakes to be repeated, but also it's a great time for us to commemorate all these historic heroes out there that really gave us what we're enjoying now, which is exactly why we're going to hear from a fellow Gen Z who knows all of this, the meaning and value of history. Stay tuned for our live interview. Why is history important, and how can we benefit from our learning more about our past? To answer that, we have Pan Junyoung, a Gen Z who claims to love history himself. Welcome, Junyoung.
Hello, thank you for having me.
All right, Junyoung, you're speaking on behalf of all those history lovers out there. So since when did you build an interest in history, and just how much do you like this subject area?
Well, I cannot remember exactly when, but I think my interest began growing since I was in elementary school. At first, history was not my favorite because it was difficult to memorize all the details, like names of the king, years, and the order of the historic events. And Korea has such a long and complicated history. But the more I study and learn history, the more I realize how thankful we are and how amazing this country and our ancestors are. Also, I think learning history is the most powerful way to understand who I am, which is another reason why I love it. So I kept studying it even after graduating high school myself, and I got certificate for Korean History Proficiency Test Level 1, which is the highest level.
Wow.
Wow. I'm just going to quote you right there because you said something so beautiful. You said history is a powerful way to learn about yourself. So it seems like you must have your favorite historical figure. We would love to know who it is and how you commemorate this person.
Well, my favorite historical figure is An Jung-geun. And he's remembered for his assassination of Ito Hirogumi, who has served as the first resident general of Korea. His courage to assassinate Japanese politician itself is already impressive. But what makes my favorite figure is what he said during the trial. He insisted that he did nothing wrong. Instead, he recited reasons why Ito should be killed. Even facing the death, he was brave, and he was ready to die for the independence of Korea. There's a musical, Young, which is about An Jung-geun's life. I watch the musical whenever I get a chance. Also, on February 14th, which is well-known as Valentine's Day, is actually the day that An Jung-geun was sentenced to death by the Japanese imperialism. So on that day, I spent some time to commemorate and appreciate him.
Thank you for letting us know. Tomorrow is 3.1절, and a day we commemorate all of our independence fighters who sought independence from colonial Japan. So how are you planning to spend tomorrow, Junyoung?
Well, as you can see, I already prepared taegukgi to hoist it. Also, this Monday, I visited Tapgol Park, a historically important park as the site of origin of the March 1st movement in 1919. It is the first location for the reading of the Proclamation of Independence. Tomorrow, I'm planning to watch one of those movies about our independence fighters like YUGwansun and Yun like you mentioned. Also, I'll join one of our campaigns to commemorate the Independence Movement Day and donate 31 won per one hooray.
Junyoung, based on all the photos we just saw, it seems like it's not the first time that you commemorate days like March 1st or other historical monuments in Korea's history by going out to the historical sites and bringing out your taegukgi. So how would you like other millennials and Gen Z to spend days like 3.1절 or better commemorate major historical milestones?
Well, I heard someone said that the independence of Korea was accomplished by the Allied powers, especially the US, instead of by ourselves. But I do believe that thanks to the continuous independence movement and unyielding heart, Korean could keep the identity and the spirit. And this finally led to independence. There's saying that a nation that forgets its past has no future. With that in mind, I hope millennials and Gen Z not to consider tomorrow simply as a holiday. Instead, it would be much better if they join the campaign, visit historic sites, or watch movies to commemorate the historical milestones. Nowadays, there are so many different interesting ways to remember the figures. So I wish they make use of these opportunity actively.
Just like yourself, Junyoung. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Junyoung's interview just really shook me a bit. It was quite motivational and inspirational to see a fellow millennial and Gen Z go out to historical sites with his national flag and remember all these historical figures.
Beautiful.
And based on that, do you guys have any special plans for 3.1절, or are you willing to change them just like Junyoung?
I'm totally inspired, and I feel like I will be upgrading my plans for tomorrow. I would definitely be hanging out the Korean flag as we do on national holidays. But since he said, visiting Tapgo Park, I think is one of them, and talking about Yoon Dong-ju, as Kyun mentioned, there's a movie about Yoon Dong-ju's life. So I might watch it, and also I have his poem book that I probably might read it again. So just like what he said, probably more things to really commemorate the day and have the day to myself.
All right, what about you, Hyun?
I will obviously take a day off, just like everyone else,
Yes.
rest a bit. But at the same time, think back on these past events and just really be thankful and not really forget about these important events, because without these events and these kind of young people, like they were much younger than me right now.
So much, yeah.
All the suffering they went through, because without them, like I said, there will be no present right now. And of course, without history, there will be no future.
Yes.
And Jessica just talked about some of the films that we could actually watch. There's Dongju,
That was one.
Hunger,
yes.
and Malmoe as well.
Wow.
That really relates to what really happened at that time in Korea.
So watching films
Why
could be
not?
a stepping stone, I
Right.
guess, especially for those of you who might find this subject area of history to be too distant or something that you have no knowledge about. Just think of it as like a new type of content. We are seeing a lot of different films come out, even animation, stories, or even better, why don't you use this time to talk to your grandparents, because they can give you actual firsthand experience of what it was like to live at the times. But most importantly, I hope one thing you can take away from today's episode is that we should remember March 1st movement, 3.1절, as a beacon of where South Korea is at today, independence. Now, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Jessica Dainong
Pleasure's always mine. Thank you.
and Park Ki-hoon.
It's bad.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. Have a wonderful 3.1절, and we'll see you next week. We are News
News Generation.
Generation.